Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because I have somebody on the show today, who really, for me, when you start thinking about the impact that people can make at the senior level in some of the largest organizations, absolutely does exist. It's not myth, okay? And we're also going to talk about how those things can happen and have both people, financial, and really community impact. Walt Rakowich can trace his approach to leadership to his roots as the son of working class parents in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He says he hit the parent lottery. His parents were hardworking, unassuming children of first-generation immigrants. As a kid, Walt could be found playing the trumpet, drums, guitar, or baseball. Neither of his parents had a college degree, but they taught him and his 2 sisters the value of things like working hard, treating people with respect, acting with integrity, and serving the greater good. The values his parents taught him were tested as he made his way through college at Penn State and began working in accounting and then real estate, becoming CEO of Prologis in 2008. Walt received his MBA from Harvard Business School. He was a senior audit and tax consultant at Pricewaterhouse in Pittsburgh and spent 9 years as a partner and principal with real estate provider Trammell Crow Company in Los Angeles. He joined Prologis as a consultant in 1993 and would spend the bulk of his career there in various roles before becoming chief operating officer before departing at the beginning of 2008. He returned later that year as CEO when the company was on the brink of bankruptcy, and he and his team orchestrated a turnaround that breathed new life into the company and to the company's balance sheet and the company and its culture. Then he led the company through a successful merger before stepping away in 2012. After retirement, Walt began some soul searching about how he can make a difference in the lives of others during the next phase of his life. Over the years, with the help of formal and informal training and the example modeled by his parents, he began to codify his ideas about faith, values, and leadership, creating the deep footings that provided invaluable during his tumultuous tenure as CEO. Moved by the challenge he saw emerging, leaders facing today, and by the idea of what he learned about leadership might help them rise to meet the challenges in some meaningful way, he wrote Transfluence: How to Lead with Transformative Influence in Today's Climate of Change. Walt believes in the transformational influence that organizations can have on their employees, customers, suppliers, and communities. As such, he serves on the board of several companies, including Host Hotels and Resorts, Iron Mountain, Ventas Inc., and Gender Fair. Walt also serves on the board of trustees of his alma mater, Penn State University, and the board of inner-city youth organizations such as Colorado Uplift Elevate USA, ACE Scholarships, and Pivot Denver. In his free time, Walt enjoys golfing, traveling, mentoring youth, and participating in a wide range of service community initiatives. He and his wife, Sue, have 2 adult children and reside in Colorado. Walt Reikowicz, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Thanks, Jim. Can't wait.
No, I'm glad you're here. And we've had a really, incredible and connective, type of discussion, prior to us actually hitting the go live button. But I wanted to make sure, that we get a better understanding of your perspectives on your current passion, because it's quite different than you may think from a, former CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So if you could, please share your current passion with us.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate you asking. My current passion is really helping emerging leaders become better at what they do. Look, I had crucible moments in my career, a couple of them that you described. Coming back to a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. I think you learn the most in crucible moments. I certainly did. And what I learned is that the essence of great leadership is really all about building trust. If you can build trust in the organization, you've got everything. if you have no trust, ultimately things break down. And I truly believe that you best build trust by starting off with this notion as a leader that it's not about you. It's about the influence that you can have on other people. Really turning the focus off of you and putting it on others, serving other people. I think if people see that you want to serve them, that you want to invest time in them, ultimately you'll build trust in the organization and you'll get to the destiny you want to get to. I like to also say that, too many leaders, I think, are very focused on the destiny. In my case, the destiny was turning around a company. The destiny might be hitting the numbers for the quarter. Who knows what the destiny is that you go to work to try to achieve every day. But I think the real objective is more about the journey. It's more about the difference you make in the lives of people. It's more about investing in them, building them up. And I think if you do a really good job of that, you'll get to the destination you want to get to. That's what I found in the turnaround at Prologis. And I think it's really all about building trust. You build trust through investing in people.
Well, and as you say that, and me having the opportunity to go through the book, and you tell the story about how all of this transpired and how you had a connection and you had trust in a senior leadership team, and then there was some change above you, and that eroded over time. And when you had, that crucible moment, and the organization did, when, the recession of 2008 hit, all of that came to light. And it was, I'm sure for many organizations, a harsh, staunch reality. So if you could tell us just a brief moment of how that transpired, because you left and then you came back really quick.
Correct. So I had been working for the company for about 14 years prior to the downturn in 2008. And I rose through the ranks of the company. I was a chief financial officer for a while. Actually, an operating position, a regional person, and then a chief financial officer, and then ultimately the president, chief operating officer. And I had a boss who was the CEO of the company, who I admired in some respects, and he was probably one of the most brilliant people I ever met in my life. But in many respects, he was about him, Jim. And when you have leadership that way, it's just very difficult to work in the organization. I mean, people were working in silos. I thought we were making bad investment decisions, some bad people decisions. And I just really didn't like it anymore. And so I went to the board of directors and said, it's time for me to exit stage left, if you will. And I left the company. And that was in January 2008. At that point in time, our stock price, the market capitalization of the company was about $20 billion. And that equated to a stock price of about $72 or $73 a share, something in that neighborhood. And then over the course of the next 10 months after I had left the company, the stock price was the third worst performing stock in the S&P 500, was down 96%. And I got a call from the board of directors in November of 2008, asking me if I wanted to take over as the CEO, and that they would move on from the CEO that was there. And it was a tough decision. It really was. I mean, the first thing going through your mind is, I don't know if I have the chops to do this. I mean, this company's on the verge of bankruptcy. But then I thought about all the people that I had hired over the years, and I just felt like it was the right thing to do. And so I went back and took the job as the CEO, and that was the beginning of, if you will, me understanding how to try to lead through a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, and you share something about your, fierce loyalty, to all of those people, and that was really one of the driving factors of you going back. However, when you start talking about taking them out of that brink, you really focus in, and what's the bedrock of your book here is you talk about transformative influence. Yeah. So if you could explain what that really means.
Sure. The word transfluence, which is the name of the book, stands for, as you mentioned, transformative influence. And as I started talking about in the beginning as to what my passions are, I think as a leader, you've got a lot of objectives. But I actually think the most important objective you have is the influence that you have on other people. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that. And I think it starts off with that notion that it's not about you. It is about the influence you have. And so therefore the book is called Transformative Influence, or Transfluence. I think it's all about trying to make people better. If you can make them better, if you invest in their lives, then they perform for you. They'll kill to perform for you. And that's what I saw missing in the organization. And I think a lot of it was because we had leadership breakdowns prior to this, and people stopped trusting. The truth of the matter is our employees didn't trust management. The board, the employees didn't trust the board. Investors didn't trust the employees in the board. And there was that lack of trust. And we really had to rebuild that trust when we came back.
Well, and as you're talking, okay, so we all hear, just as overall, society talks about, you can call them some of the pundits, some of the experts and everything, they talk about the pressures of a publicly traded company with that short term and long term. I mean, to me, when you're talking about trust, and even when I go through the book and talk about Transfluence, and we're going to talk a minute about, the 3H core, those are long term. I mean, I'm not, so if I'm getting pressure from the board and I'm getting pressure from the market, to hit those quarterly numbers and those projections, how do you, to me, that would be a massive struggle to try to manage.
Well, I think it's about long term, and there's short term pain. When I first took over the company, I think that not only was I dysfunctional because I was trying to figure out how to do it, but I think our management team was dysfunctional. Everything was dysfunctional. But you work through it, and it doesn't happen overnight. You can't expect it to happen overnight. So there's going to be missteps along the way. There's going to be earnings missteps along the way. Let me tell you what, our first couple quarters of earnings were horrific. Fortunately, in some respects, maybe we were at the bottom of the barrel, and so the expectations of our shareholders were probably not all that high, and maybe that we could use that to our benefit to a certain degree. But no, things don't happen overnight. But nothing good happens overnight. You have to remember that, and it's a long-term game, and if you play that long-term game the right way, you'll get the results. And in the meantime, you just simply have to be transparent about the fact that you're not going to hit your numbers, or perhaps things aren't going to be as good as they look, and it's going to take a while. And I think, generally speaking, investors understand that, particularly when you're on the brink of bankruptcy. They understand it's going to take a while. So, as I said, maybe we had the luxury of that too. So, but anyway, it took a while, and but I think the right things happened over time.
And yeah, without a doubt. And so talking about how to create that long-term, path, and, building upon it, a strong foundation, you talk about that bedrock being the 3H core. So yeah. 3H core is.
Okay. So when I first took the job, I had an investment banker friend of mine from Morgan Stanley. Oh, by the way, the Wall Street Journal did an article right after I took over about how we were on the brink of bankruptcy, and front page article. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. And my investment banker friend of mine called me up from Morgan Stanley, and he said, Walt, Goldman's going bankrupt supposedly in the market, and Morgan Stanley is going bankrupt maybe in the market, and he said, would you, mutual commiseration, would you like to spend some time with John Mack, who's the CEO at Morgan Stanley? And I said, sure, I'd love to. And I got on the line with Mack, and Mack was revered as truly one of the, better, if not one of the best investment bankers, just from a managerial perspective in particular. The way he managed people, he was really revered in the business. And I got on the line with John, and I said, so John, how, just tell me how you're managing your people during this downturn. He said, Walt, I got to tell you, I managed this company on the basis of 3 H's. And now he had me intrigued. I said, well, what the heck is that? He said, Walt, I think the best managers I've learned over my career, the best managers are humble. He said, they're honest. And then he kind of cracked a joke, and he said, this day and age, banker needs to have a sense of humor. And I laughed at that. And I thought about it. And, it's one of these things where 5 years later, it just made an indelible mark in me, and, in terms of how I managed people and the like. But anyway, I went home, I started thinking about that last thing, humor. And I never really viewed myself as a humorous person. But I think what Mack was really saying was that humor sort of fits in the context of this broader word called humanity. It's about being human. It's about the relatability that you have with people. It's about how you treat them. And not just CEOs, but leaders ought to be focused on that. And by the way, if that takes cracking a joke from time to time, fine, so be it. And so when I wrote my book, I wrote a lot about this, what I called the 3H core. And that is about humility, it's about honesty, and it's about, I call it in the book, I try to truncate it into the word heart. And what I say is that I think humility is sort of how you see yourself. I think heart is kind of how you see other people. And honesty is the action or the transaction that connects the two. And you can be the most humble person in the world, and you can be the most human person in the world, but without brutal honesty, you're not going to build trust in your organization. You almost need to have that integrity to connect the two, right? And so I talk about that as the 3H core. I truly believe that leaders that are humble, they're honest, and they're human, go a long way towards making a difference in the lives of people and building trust in their organizations.
Well, as you're talking, I started thinking that really what you're saying and what you refer to in the book is that, leaders have a higher calling. And I think what you were just explaining was these things need to happen, especially, today and going forward.
Yep.
Talk about all of these other external factors. So if you can, elaborate a little bit more on that higher calling.
I will. Yeah. I like to go back. I like to go back to 1979 when I took my first job. And I think it's easier to explain it that way. When I took my first job out of college at 79, I was happy to be employed. Leadership paid very little attention to culture. I think people were less critical, less vocal. My job was transactional, and it was a command and control leadership environment. When I say it was transactional, I needed a job, I needed a paycheck, and they needed someone to get the work done. That's how I think things were in 1979. And I can't tell you when exactly they began to change. But when I took the job as the CEO in 2008, and yes, it was a tough time in the marketplace, period. But I'm telling you, Jim, I bet I received 1,000, the first day, 1,000 calls, emails, you name it, from sell-side analysts, from investors, from the rating agencies, from news publications, to social media outlets, to employees, to board members, you name it. Some of them were congratulating me, and some of them were asking me, no, they were demanding that I get back to them to talk about what was now going to happen at Prologis. The difference between the two, and the other thing is that online chats were just really active about how's Walt going to do, and is this company going to make it? Is it going to get turned around? And some of those online chats were our employees, okay? And so, we live in a world, I talk about this in the book. I call it the three changing climates. We live in a world with greater access to information, with more diversity in people, choice, everything, accelerating progress. It's a world that I think creates tremendous opportunities on one hand, but I'm going to tell you something. It is tough to lead in this environment these days. Why? Because leaders are expected more. The more people know about you, the more expectations there are of you. And I just think that, when you talk about, you want to talk about what's changed, that's what's changed. And so why do leaders need to be this way today? Why do leaders need to lead with a heart? Why do they need to be more humble? And why do they need to be brutally honest and transparent? And why do they need to lead with a heart? Because that's what the market is demanding. And I think it's just a different world out there.
Yeah, and when you say market, some people may, their mind and perspective may go to financial. But I think what you're talking about is just more of an ecosystem when you talk about market. Right. Even when you start talking about the worker as they're getting into the workforce and others are exiting, that younger workforce, it has become a situation where it's like, if it isn't this way, I'm out of here.
Exactly. So I'm glad you raised that. Let me be specific. I think we're competing for talent today. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that we had the COVID environment, and I know the unemployment rate is up and people are looking for jobs, but it wasn't but 6 months ago where the unemployment rate was 3.5%. And in addition to that, I think we're going to get back to that point in time. And so we have a talent war out there. People are competing for talent. When my daughter first took her first job out of college, she wasn't asking about anything other than, okay, what's the culture like in that organization? I never asked that question in 1979. I mean, and so she wants to make sure that the culture is right in an organization before she'll take the job. And in a year from that, if she finds that it's not, she's out of there. And so if you want to lead a company today, that's what I'm talking about. The environment that we're in today is far different. The expectations of good employees are far different. And I think you got to lead in that way.
Most definitely. And I would dare to say, even when we start talking about, because of the things that have been forced on us and the rapid transformation that has happened, and when you start looking at the needs of the organization and the skill levels that we now need versus what we needed in February of 2020, that war has just been raised significantly.
It really has. You have fewer face-to-face interactions today with COVID. You've got a more distributed workforce. You and I are talking via virtually right now. I think you have an overabundance of false narratives as well that are out there for leaders to deal with, and more voices to be heard. So all of those things create, to me, the need for a more constant drumbeat of communication, brutal transparency, openness, values-based leadership, which I talk a lot about. And I think leadership that enforces the human element. I mean, funny thing is, how many Zoom calls have you been on? At least I've been on a number of them, with dogs barking in the background and, babies crying. There's never been a melding together of our personal lives and our business lives like we have today. And if you don't have flexible and empathetic leadership, you got a problem.
Most definitely. I think the virtual leader is quite different than the leader that has proximity. And right now, because of all of this, I don't think there's going to be such a greater need for the virtual leader that it's going to, like I was, talking about adding to that war, is going to be significant. But you talk also about the internal storms. You mentioned something about the three dynamic climates, and then you get into the whole internal storms. So if you could explain that a little bit.
I will. So let me just say this. I think that leaders face two of the greatest storms that face leaders are pride and fear. It's really that simple. And I saw it in technical. I saw it with myself. I'll get into that in a minute. But, let's deal with the first one, pride. Authentic pride, I think, is actually pretty good. I mean, I have pride in my children. I have pride in the accomplishments of my business, let's say, or my people. The problem is when pride starts getting to yourself, it slowly but surely becomes what I call hubristic pride in the book. I think it's about vanity, egotism, arrogance, narcissism. You get to that point, and that's when you're going to have problems in leadership. You look at great examples would be FIFA, what happened to the soccer organization at the top, Volkswagen and the emissions scandal, right? Theranos, the blood testing company. It all started from the arrogance from the top. GM, Prologis in 2007, 2008. Arrogant leadership will kill you. And then the flip side of that is pride, or is fear. And there's also good fear. I like this. I think in the book I talk about Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift said, before I get out and perform, I'm fearful of the audience. And so that actually forces me to perform better. There are certain fears that are actually good. But the problem with fear is when it gets into insecurities, it kills you. Harvard Business Review did a striking article 5 years ago, and it was about what CEOs are afraid of. That's the name of the article. And they interviewed 115, not CEOs, but just C-level executives all throughout the world. And they said, what are your greatest fears? And you would have thought that, well, we fear employees leaving or our financial condition or the competition. No. The number one fear was incompetence. And you say, I'm reading this article, I'm going, what? And yes, it is. Incompetence, being wrong. Leaders feared being wrong. And they talked about how it undermined their relationships, with others. Then they talked about fearing vulnerability, fearing being unseated, underachievement, not doing enough. And the funny thing is, Jim, these fears were all about the leaders themselves. They had nothing to do with the dynamics of the business. They were all about the leaders. So the problem is when you get into this whole notion of pride and fear, and it becomes about you, it is really hard for you to serve other people, for you to get out of your own way and put them first. And if you will, lead with transformative influence. So yeah, I think those are two major storms. I think the more a leader can deal with them, the better off he or she will be.
Well, and to convert those things into positive, because all those things swell within everybody's head. Those.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
They're common. I think the most important thing is how to be able to get out of that. And one of the things that you refer to are creating microclimates. So a little bit about what we need to do as far as that's concerned.
So I think it's important, first of all, to understand yourself. And I'm actually a big believer in coaching. I believe that sometimes we need people to tell us what our problems are. I had a coach that I hired, and the coach came in and he said, Walt, he did extensive 360-degree evaluation of me and personality testing. He did it for the whole management team. And I remember the first time he sat down with me and he said, let me tell you the bad news and the good news. Which do you want to hear first? I said, well, how about the good news? And he said, well, the good news is that people actually really enjoy working for you. I said, well, that's great. And I said, what about the bad news? And he said, the bad news is that your empathy scores could be higher. I said, what? He said, yeah, your empathy scores could be higher. He said, well, the problem is that you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off and you fear failure. I said, you're absolutely right. I feel failure. I don't want this company to go bankrupt. And he said, but the problem is that the perception that people have that report to you is that they can't come into your office and even talk to you because you're too busy. And you don't want to give that fearful look anyway to your employees. And so you need to be more empathetic. And so let's develop a plan to do it. So I actually believe that first and foremost, people have to deal with their own fears and they have to deal with their own pride, and having somebody on the outside to do it helps. And so it helps to take the attention off of you. I think the second thing is this world is a lot more, Jim, it's a lot more transparent today. And the only way you fight transparency is be more transparent. And so I talk a lot about the fact that expectations of leaders are greater. And I talk in the book about what that means in terms of being more transparent. And the third thing I would say is I think leaders need to lead with a strong core of authentic values. There is a void in trust out there in the marketplace today. And I think leaders have to work really hard at building that trust, and they have to do it through believability. And so I think leaders have to show a window into their soul. They have to truly be able to be vulnerable and act in accordance with that 3H core that I talked about: humility, honesty, and heart. Those three things I think are critically important.
Well, and as you're talking too, I see a couple of things that, talking about focus and talking about ways forward and creating microclimates and all of those things that are associated with, building that trust. And I think there's been a significant shift that we even need to look at is, we talk about transparency, but the fact is if you're not visible, being a remote leader now, if you're not visible, because I can't, go and walk into somebody's office anymore.
Right.
If I'm not visible on a consistent basis, if I'm not my own media generator, it's going to be extremely difficult for me to even get to transparency because there's always going to be that suspicion that's there.
So I was on a board call a couple of weeks ago with several people of one of the companies that I'm on, and not just the CEO. We were talking to mid-level managers. We were talking to all kinds of managers. And we asked that question: how do they deal with that in the environment? And they said that they find themselves having to be proactive and reach out to their employees like they've never done that before. And unfortunately, they have to do that virtually. They're not meeting with them for breakfast, but they are reaching out. And in some respects, the virtual world has allowed them to reach out to more people individually than they have been able to do in the past, but that they have to actually be proactive. And they have to be, and not only that, they have to get on these virtual calls one-on-one with their employees and say, how are you doing? No, how are you doing? In one case, one of the companies I'm on had 3 suicide attempts just 2 weeks ago. And they talked about how this is on the rise. And I believe them. I believe people are going through a real difficult time right now in some cases. And I think if you as a leader can't reach out and try to dig deep and figure that out, then shame on you. And I also think and it depends on what your company resources are. But some companies are actually beginning to provide consulting services, services where employees can actually go and talk to people about their issues. Because certainly, outside, sometimes it's just outside of the realm of your leadership ability to be able to deal with that. And so I'm proud to say that, at least one of the companies I'm on are providing those services to their employees. I think we got to be thinking outside of the box at this stage in the game.
Well, and we do. And so I think there's a lot of shifting that needs to happen and behavior change that still needs to happen because now that we've kind of worked our way through the chaos and are starting to slowly move forward, how I behave as a leader and the things that I do on a daily basis can't be what they used to be. And they can't be what they were, during the, chaos term, the chaos phase, if you want to call it that. And you talk about part of what I think we can do and help with this is a conversation that you had with Frank Blake, who was the former CEO of Home Depot, when he shared with you about the inverted pyramid.
Yes.
I think for me is extremely important because, I'm all about customer experience, employee experience, and that focus. So tell us a little bit about the pyramid and then how it fits into Transfluence.
So Frank Blake is an awesome leader. He is an awesome leader. I love spending time with him. And so, when he took over Home Depot was really in trouble. And I think their stock was down 40 or 50% that year. And it was a tough time. So he was asking himself, how do I quickly make a difference in this organization? And he reverted back to some of the things that the original leadership at Home Depot espoused. And one of the things he saw was that there was a triangle. Most people draw their triangle with the CEO at top. And then after that comes corporate support and then field support. And then, you're going down the triangle now. Then you go frontline employees and then you go customers. And he said, we need to take that triangle with the CEO at the top and we need to flip it. We need to put the CEO at the bottom and we need to put the customers at the top. And then below the customers would be the frontline employees. And below that would be the field support and then the corporate support. And then at the bottom of the triangle would be the CEO. And I thought that was brilliant. And for 3 or 4 reasons. The first thing is that it really underscored the importance of integrity. What Frank said to me was, he said, it puts leaders in a weight-bearing position. And so the problem is if you lack integrity on one side or the other side, the whole thing fractures. The whole thing falls apart. You got to have integrity through everything you do. And the second thing is it recognizes the importance that stuff above you is more important. And so you got to communicate up as opposed to communicating down. And so you got to push your communications up more as a CEO, and you got to say things 3 or 4 times before people, really understand it. It's all uphill. And the last thing is it's centered on other people. It's not centered on you. It recognizes that others are doing the important stuff above you. And I just love that. And I talk a lot in my book about it. Frank came in and he just completely turned around the company. he was out in the field networking with the people, getting to know the people. He was definitely an employee, a people person. Employees loved him. Completely turned around Home Depot, did an amazing job. And hopefully your listeners will read that chapter for sure, because that chapter, I think, is critically important in how you want to turn a company around, how you want to build trust in your organization.
Without a doubt. And so for me, we've talked about a lot of things, but I kind of want to talk about the goalposts or the guideposts that you put in here in regards to get to Transfluence. And there's 10 of them. And throughout the book, you essentially take these guideposts and then you elaborate upon them. And really, for me, it's how you get to the point of building, that trust and having Transfluence. And I want to just go through those real quick. Okay, so number 1 is harsh climates bring tough challenges, embrace every one of them. The second is storms rage from deep within us, and confronting them is painful. Endure the pain. 3, fear and pride can drive the decisions of leaders. Don't give them control. 4, selfishness is our default response as humans. Be selfless. Be selfless and different. 5, transparency is scary and uncomfortable. Be bold and let people in. 6, humility puts our pride at risk. And risk it anyway. 7, honesty often leads to conflict. Never waver from the battle. 8, leading with heart requires trust. Give trust the chance. And then 9, purpose and meaning are fleeting. Never give up on them. And then 10, maintaining passion is hard work and reignite it daily. So I think for all of us, going through and having these guideposts and being able to use Transfluence and build the trust so that we have, so many of the benefits on the back end. It's difficult and it's challenging, but the payoff is significant in a lot of different ways. And so I think even you, as you were going through and talking about, we were talking about your bio, we're talking about, where you are now and what you've been doing, from a board perspective as well as from a volunteer perspective, I think you've done an excellent job of giving us a roadmap, but it's not easy. Right? It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. Not at all. I agree.
Inspiration, a lot of help. One of the things that we look for on the show to help us to find inspiration are quotes. Is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
Boy. I don't know if I'd say this is a quote, but I put it in quotes in the book, and that is, it's not about you. I think that's the most important quote behind Transfluence.
And to me, when you say that, I can see that as far as reading the book, is that you're talking about that from an internal perspective, meaning the whole internal storms, an internal perspective from the organization, and then also from a customer perspective.
Yep.
So thanks for sharing that. But, that we didn't often get that way. In the book, you talk about a lot of times where you've had to get over the hump, right? Challenges that defined you, differences that you've had. If you could just kind of briefly talk about one of those times that you've gotten over hump so that people can learn.
Well, I will. I would say that one of the most defining moments for me that I write about in the book is a situation that took immense humility and vulnerability. And so let me share that. I had been with the company. I had been back in the job, for about 2 months. And it was December of 2008. And it was late at night, after midnight. And I was in a conference room with a number of people, finance people. And one of my finance people told me that we were about ready to blow covenants on the majority of our bonds, which were billions of dollars in bonds. And I asked them what that meant. And they said, it means that we're going to likely have to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And I got white as a ghost. I asked them for time. They said, sure. I walked out of the room. And as I was walking down the hall, I kept getting fainter and fainter. And I saw a chair in the distance. And I tried to get to the chair as quickly as I could, but I couldn't. And I fell and I hit the corner of my head against the corner of the desk and split my head open. And I laid there for what turned out to be about 10 minutes in a pool of blood. And I woke up for the first probably 10, 15 seconds. I had no idea where I was. It was dark outside. And I realized that all of these people were still in the room waiting for me. So I went into the bathroom and I quickly got the bleeding to stop, and I went back in the room and I said, well, let's talk about this bankruptcy issue. And someone in the room said, no, Walt, let's talk about that lump on your head first. And I realized, Jim, that I was in a vulnerable moment. And I looked around and I said, I was hired to be the CEO of this company. And the truth of the matter is that I don't have any answers. I just don't have the answers. I mean, and CEOs are supposed to have the answers. This time, I don't. I need everybody. And it was like a cone of silence for about 10 seconds, which seemed like a full minute, And then somebody piped up and they said, well, give us a week. We'll take care of this. We're going to figure this out. And I realized that leaders don't always have to have the answers. And sometimes there's power in vulnerability. And sometimes saying that we don't empowers other people to figure it out. And it was a seminal moment for me. And I'm not saying that leaders need to always be vulnerable. They can't, right? I mean, they have to carry the flag. But let me tell you, a little dose of vulnerability and humility goes a long way. And you know what? We got through it. We never filed for bankruptcy. We never got sued, which was amazing. And the reason is because we had great people and they figured it out, not me.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And you and I have talked a lot about, where you're headed and what you're doing, the impact you want to make. And I can tell you that the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Humpty Hold On. Okay, Walt, the Humpty Hold On is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Walt Rakowich, are you ready to hold down?
I'm ready.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
My own pride and fear, which still gets in the way from time to time.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Take the focus off of yourself and put it on others.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
Brutal transparency with everybody around you.
And what do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
Humility, honesty, and humanness.
And what would be one book you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Transfluence, How to Lead with Transformative Influence in Today's Climate of Change on your show notes page as well.
Halftime, written by Bob Buford. The tagline underneath of that is, take your career from success to significance.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Walt Rakowich. Okay, Walt, this is my last Humpty Hold On question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25. You can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
I would take integrity back with me. And I not that I was dishonest back then, but I didn't realize the importance of not just what I said, but what I didn't say and the way that I acted. I would take integrity back.
Walt, I had a really fun time with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Yes, they can connect to me in a number of different ways. My website is waltrakowich.com. Let me spell that. WaltRakowich.com. On Twitter, I'm at Walt Rakowich. I'm also on LinkedIn, Walter Rakowich. And those would be the three best ways for people to get a hold of me.
Walt Rakowich, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.